The Out of the Norm Show is brought to you through the generosity of our partners in progress. Northwest Arkansas Community College, the College at the Crossing, Bella Vista Center, Envy Salon, specializing in cuts and color in Fayetteville, A.G. Russell Knives in Rogers, the Bank of Gravette, caretakers of the Arkansas spirit, the Tuscan Trotter American Brasserie, just off the square in downtown Bentonville, Discount Smokes and Liquors at the state line in Jane, Missouri, Smith Family Chiropractic Clinic in Bentonville, Hoffman Realty in Bella Vista. It's the Out of the Norm Show. Stories about people, places, things, and events from all across the great country of America. The Out of the Norm Show, where the stories are all about you.
Hi, welcome to the Out of the Norm Show, where the stories are all about you. In fact, today is going to be a story all about America, and it's going to take us from 2 or 3 different generations and eras in American history that I think you're going to find fascinating. Mr. Andy Hogan is going to be our guest, host, and guide today as we visit one of the most famous sites in Oklahoma from one of the most famous men in the world in his day, Mr. Will Rogers. So please don't go away. We've got a great story ahead for you on the Out of the Norm Show, where the stories are all about you.
Tobacco companies show you images of what life would be like if you smoke.
They tell you tough, hard-working people smoke their cigarettes.
That you look cool, hip. Hell yes.
That smoking makes you independent, beautiful, and mysterious.
But the reality is that you can end up looking like this.
Hi, welcome back to the Out of the Norm Show. Glad you're back with us. Mr. Andy Hogan is with us at the Will Rogers Memorial Museum, or Museum and Memorial. Is that the right title?
Well, actually, it's a memorial museum.
Okay.
There's a lot of confusion over it, but I tell the kids a memorial means to remember, and the museum is a room full of stuff, so it's a room full of stuff to remember about Will Rogers. So it's the Will Rogers Memorial Museum.
Now, why is this particular place such a special place in Oklahoma history?
Well, this location, as a matter of fact, was purchased by Will Rogers. The reason we're located on this hill in Claremore, Oklahoma is because Will bought 20 acres here in 1911, planned on this being his retirement home someday. He said when they quit laughing at my gags out there in California, I'm going to move to that hilltop there in Claremore. They probably never would have, but then now it's his final resting place.
And this is the hill he was talking about?
This is the hill. He was killed in 1935. Well, his wife gave this to the state of Oklahoma in 1937 with the provisions that they build this memorial. And they started, this thing actually was built in 9 months.
Wow.
They started in April of '38, and it was completed on Will's birthday, November the 4th of 1938.
Wow, so we're talking about a career, a public career from 1917 to 1938?
Will actually got into show business in 1902 in Ladysmith, South Africa with the Texas Jack's Wild West show. And from there he progressed to a circus in Australia and New Zealand, the Worth Brothers Circus. Came back to the United States, much to his dad's chagrin. He did not want to run the farm. He wanted to continue with the show business. The Cherokee Kid, he called himself. And he worked with several Wild West shows, mostly with Mulhalls out of Mulhall, Oklahoma. And he combined a couple of times with the Buffalo Bill show, and that's where he met Tom Mix. He and Tom Mix were good friends. They're kind of like 2 little puppies just getting into something all the time. But he went from there then, he went to the stage, the vaudeville stage in Chicago, finally hit the big time in New York City, and worked, as a matter of fact, he worked with the Ziegfeld Follies some when he was in New York City.
Right. Well, as time went on, though, I mean, other states have famous celebrities who came from there, but Will Rogers is different for Oklahoma. This isn't like Marilyn Monroe's home in Southern California or something like that. I mean, there was a level of him that was different than other actors, though, isn't there?
Will was born out here 13 miles. Born in that house right there, lower right-hand corner, log walls. He said he was like Abe Lincoln. He was born in a log house, but his was a little fancier than Abe's was. But Will was raised out there. He called it BIT, Beautiful Indian Territory. Never lived in Oklahoma when it was named Oklahoma. It was Indian Territory, and by the time it was named Oklahoma, he's working on the stage in New York City. But he never forgot where he came from. He said one time, he said, I'm an old country boy, living in the big city, eating pretty well, doing pretty well, and I probably will continue to do it as long as I remember I'm an old country boy. Never rose above his raisins. A multimillionaire, he could buy anything he wanted, but he didn't act like it. Will was common. And that was the one point that he always stressed, that he was just as common, and never poor, but always common. And he always looked out, he loved people, he didn't care who it was. He felt at home with the kings and queens and the presidents just as much as he did with the guy that shined his boots. He was one of everybody, Will was.
A true Oklahoman.
A true Oklahoman.
All right.
When he got into the movies, Will did a lot of ad-libbing. He changed, John Ford was the director that enjoyed working with Will. He said, Will changes my movies for me. He said, but he does make them better. If a director wanted all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed, they had a little trouble with Will, because Will did not stick to the script. But he always put Oklahoma in there, Claremore, Rogers, he always slipped something like that in. He might practice 2 days in a row, and then when it came time to shoot, he'd do something completely different, and everybody knew it. So they all ganged around just to see what he was going to do, because he was always going to do something different. W.C. Fields worked with him for 7 years on the stage, and he said, I worked with that guy 7 years and never heard him give the same monologue 2 nights in a row. He knew everybody was listening to him, even the cast and the crew, so he wanted to change it for them.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a tour and let Andy tell the story as we go through the Will Rogers Memorial Museum right here in Claremore, Oklahoma. We're not going to take a break. We're just going to take off. So please enjoy the show today. I think you're going to like this.
Will never got over his love for horses. As a young man, his dad started out on a horse named Comanche and tried to make him stay at home a little bit, and Comanche became his roping horse, his steer roping horse, and all through his life, Will had good horses. His later years, when he was living out in California as a movie star, he always kept a bunch of roping horses around. Of course, he also had a string of polo ponies too. But he'd keep the roping horses at his place, and if movie stars would come to his house, or dignitaries or so forth, they'd have a barbecue dinner, and then they'd go out and rope calves or rope goats or rope steers or something. Well, Will always had the best horse of the bunch, and he had a lot of favorite horses, and this statue right here is one of Will's favorite horses, and this was the one that he called Soap Suds. Now, Soap Suds he was trained by a professional calf roper and could do it all. Will had him when he was out in California. His wife was the one that kind of gave the name to old Soap Suds. He was a roan-colored horse, and of course, roan is kind of like you mix paint together and stir it around and don't get it all blended good. But Betty said it looks like that horse has soap bubbles all over him, so that's where he got the name of Soap Suds. Out in front of Will's tomb is a big statue of Will riding on Soap Suds called Riding Into the Sunset. So one of his favorite horses was this one here, Soap Suds. Out at California, 2 of his horses are buried out there on the ranch that died the same day, as a matter of fact, and they died after Will was killed. One of them is this Soap Suds, and the other one was a little black polo pony that he called Bootlegger, and they were the only horses that are buried out there on that ranch. Will collected tack. He loved anything to do with horses, and as he traveled around the country, and he had the ways and means to buy it, he would buy lots of different saddles from different countries where he traveled. Now, this particular saddle right here is the fanciest saddle I ever saw in my life. It's a charro saddle, and I understand that a charro are the Mexican ranchers that came from Spain originally. But he probably rode this saddle. Most of the saddles we have in here, knowing Will and the way he was, as hyperactive as he was and active, he probably rode every saddle that we have here. We have probably 15 on display here in the museum, as well as some of them out in California at his home. And we have one, as a matter of fact, in the Cowboy Hall of Fame at Oklahoma City, a copy of one that we have here also. But he loved horses and he loved tack. In the rotunda of our museum, our rotunda is square, so it's kind of a square tunda, stands the iconic statue here of Will. This was sculptured by Joe Davidson. The original of this is in Washington, D.C. at the state capitol. Oklahoma has 2 statues represented there. They have Will Rogers, and then they have Sequoyah, who was the inventor of the Cherokee alphabet. But this statue is located there in Statuary Hall. The senators, Oklahoma senators, before they go to vote on something, it's said that they always rub the toe for luck, and that's what people do here. The youngsters, when they're told not to touch things in a memorial, I always tell them it's okay. You can rub these toes right here, and they've got them polished to a real pretty gold color here too. Will Rogers was involved in radio starting about 1922. It's kind of unusual that he got into movies before he got into the radio, but he worked for an affiliate of CBS. On Sunday nights, he had a Sunday night program, and of course Will, you know, he liked to hammer the politicians, so he was quite popular. He had a 15-minute broadcast. He had a little trouble shutting up in 15 minutes, I know the feeling. But he had him an alarm clock, had an old wind up an alarm clock, and he'd set it for it to go off in 15 minutes from the time the program started. Well, he'd pull that alarm when it rang, and he'd shut up. He said the radio was the hardest thing that he had to do, the hardest type of entertainment. He said you cannot make that microphone laugh. After the first performance he did on the radio, he'd get people to come with him. We have some shots in here of different people he'd have. When he was working on the Ziegfeld Follies, he'd have some of the girls or something come with him, and then he could kind of watch them, watch their faces, and see how they responded as he was talking on the radio.
If the mouthwash you're using is not the right kind and it tastes sort of like sheep dip, why, you just have to go right on using it. I can't advise any other kind at all. Now, Mr. Owen Young asked me to annoy on this program this evening. You all know Mr. Owen D. Young, you know. He's the only sole surviving wealthy Democrat. He started the Young Plan in Europe. That was that every nation pay just according to what they could afford to pay, see? And, well, somebody else come along with an older plan than Young's plan, and it was that nobody don't pay anybody anything. And, of course, that's the oldest plan there is. And that's the one they're working under now. That's why we ain't getting anything from Europe. Now, Franklin, I can call you Franklin, and because I've known you for many years. You used to come to the Follies as a boy and see our show. In fact, you come there as an old man to see it, too. And, now, this introduction hasn't been very, well, you know, it hasn't been perhaps very learned or very flowery, but remember, you're only a candidate. As a president, I'll do right by you. I went back up here and filled up on hot dogs. So I didn't eat here today, and if I'm rotten, I don't owe you anything. I'm here as a Democrat to offset Mr. Coolidge. In fact, Mr. Coolidge is the best Democrat we ever had in the White House, anyhow. He really is. He did us all good.
This is a replica of Will's office out in California. He lived in Santa Monica. When he first moved to California, he lived in Beverly Hills. And while he was in Beverly Hills, the only time that he ever had anything really to do with politics other than a prank, and this was kind of a joke, Douglas Fairbanks and Tom Mix put him up to being the mayor of Beverly Hills. They didn't have a mayor, so he got to kind of do that. Then he bought some land out along the coastline, Santa Monica, Pacific Palisades, built a barn, built a little weekend retreat, and then they found termites in his house in Beverly Hills, so he just had that rascal torn down and just moved out to Santa Monica, and he began to add on and add on and add on. His whole room, whole building was just add-on rooms, and this was one of them. This is the one he did a lot of his writing in. He had it separate from the bedroom so that he could get up and get his newspaper, and he could get his coffee, and he could sit here. It has a representative, the little typewriter on the desk there. And it was always a portable typewriter, so he could carry it around with him because he was always traveling. He always had maps on the wall. These are the old type of maps like you'd find in an early day school because he loved geography. The only subjects he did well in school were geography and history. Definitely not the grammatical subjects. But this is just representative of what he did out in California. kind of represents the different types of show business that Will was in. We have the big mural on the wall showing that he started out in the Wild West show. He actually started out while he was in Ladysmith, South Africa. He went to the stage. We have the representation of the Ziegfeld Follies, who he worked for a while. Of course, he got into movies in 1918. He moved to California in 1919, making movies big time. He made 50 silent movies. He made, starting in 1929, he made 21 talking movies. In 6 years, he made 21 movies, so he was a busy man. We have a couple of, kind of interesting here, we have a saddle here that belonged to Will's boy Jimmy when he was little. We even have a saddle that belonged to Florence Ziegfeld's daughter, Patty Ziegfeld, when she was a young lady.
But you are an American citizen.
Well, I think I am. Folks, Indians, both my mother and father had Cherokee blood, you know. Born and raised in Indian Territory. Of course, I'm not these Americans whose ancestors come over on the Mayflower, but we met them at the boat when they landed. And it's always been to the everlasting discredit of the Indian race that we ever let them land.
After Will died, his widow, Betty, commissioned Joe Mora to make a series of dioramas depicting Will's life. And this was the first one of them. And this shows Will and his dad, Clem, heading for town. And he had 3 older sisters. There were 8 children born in that family, but 4 of them died from childhood diseases. So it was 3 older sisters and little Willie. And little Willie was a little spoiled. He was a little special to his dad. But he and his dad are headed to town, and Mom and the 3 sisters here are waving goodbye to him. And of course, this is the White House on the Verdigris River in which Will was born. In this picture, there's chickens and guineas, and there's a couple of peafowl there. And a peacock is kind of special because when Will's dad moved to Claremore and sold all the livestock, the only thing left on the farm was 1 peacock because they could not catch it. It would get on top of the barn. So a peacock is kind of special to our memorial for that reason. This depicts the main street of Claremore, Oklahoma, and this would be when Will was about 16 years old. And that's old Comanche he's riding there. His dad gave him that horse to kind of try to settle him down a little bit and make him behave. And that became his first roping horse there. That was his steer roping horse. But that's Will going down Main Street of Claremore, Oklahoma, riding old Comanche. Will liked to dress a little different from everybody else. He liked fancy clothes when he was young. When he got older, he didn't care about them. But as a youngster, he was kind of a fancy dandy. Always had a hat of some kind. Most pictures in this museum, we probably have 1,000 pictures of Will all told, and he probably has at least 800 different types of hats on in those pictures. When Will was 18 years old, he ran off from military school where he was sent in the middle of the night and headed to Texas to be a cowboy. He'd been a cowboy here on his dad's ranch, but he didn't get to go on cattle drives because of the trains were here. But he wanted to be a kind of a cowboy that got to go on cattle drives. So he did. He went to Higgins, Texas, and spent some time different ranches out there on the Ewing Ranch, and then he worked in New Mexico, Arizona, Kansas, and different places. And for 2 years he was a cowboy and living the life. And he said there's no finer life than the life of a cowboy. He said just stay young forever. Got to camp out. He got to eat beans and chili, which is his favorite foods. But mainly he got to ride horses and rope steers and calves. Will Rogers worked for the Florence Ziegfeld and the Ziegfeld Follies for several years. Will said his ugliness just made the girls look that much better. And he said Florence Ziegfeld spent thousands of dollars in costumes to glorify the American woman. He said, of course, he didn't let them women wear them costumes. He said, I don't know why I didn't let them wear them. He said, my job was to come out on the stage while the girls were changing from nothing to nothing, and then I would spin my rope and tell a few stories. Ziegfeld, at one point, Ziegfeld wanted Will fired. He didn't think he was doing any good. And about that time, that's when Will came up with a new act in which he'd start doing some roping on stage. He roped a horse on stage, and that kind of turned it around then. From then on, Will became one of the stars of the Ziegfeld Follies. And upon the death of Florence Ziegfeld, Will paid for his funeral because By that time, Ziegfeld had lost his money in the stock market and Will had gained his. This little diorama shows the family at home out in California. Will did not have a formal dining room in the house. The house was, like I say, just built out of pieces. They just add on a huge house, but it was a comfortable house. Will Jr. told a story of him one night having supper, and he said there was an Oklahoma family was stranded out there, broke down the car, and they came to the door and said Will was gone a little while from the table. When he came back, said Will Jr. asked him, said, "Well, Daddy, how much money did you give him?" And Will said, "Well, I only had $800 in my pocket." But that's the kind of the way Will was. His home was comfortable, and it was decorated a la Will Rogers. Chaps, spurs, bridles hanging off the wall, saddles all over, and of course the Texas Longhorn at the front. This saddle is one of my favorites, all in the museum. This saddle is built on a Garcia tree, which the saddle makers recognize as being quite a saddle. Will used this one on the stage in a lot of his early performances. And one of the unique things about it is, of course, he had this Navajo saddle blanket, has his name on it, and it has a design here that looks like a Nazi swastika. But what this was a Navajo peace sign. This came about before the Nazis. This was made before the Nazis even came into existence, so no, he was not a Nazi. This rope on this saddle is a 60-foot rope. And it's kind of significant because in a movie that he made, The Roping Fool, he throws this 60-foot rope and catches a man at the end of a 60-foot rope. When Will got into the movie industry, he decided, well, why don't I just start making my own movies? So he started the Will Rogers Movie Company. He made 3 movies. Lost his shirt, couldn't get them distributed because the theaters all had agreements in which they were tied up. But this is one of the movies he made. He made this one in 1922, and it depicts him doing this is the 60-foot rope that he's throwing out right now, the one that he had on that saddle. But it depicts him doing his rope tricks. Now you have to realize that a lot of these same rope tricks he did out in the street, he did on the stage, on the vaudeville stage. He said he only got the horse off in the orchestra pit one time. And he said that from then on the orchestra watched everything he did not take their eyes off of him. But this has become a classic, The Roping Fool. Will was killed in a plane crash in Alaska Territory on August the 15th, 1935, flying with Wally Post. Now this room depicts the events that went on. It had a lot of newspapers that came out the next day. It kind of shows how well known Will was. He was writing his daily newspaper article as he was making this trip to California. As a matter of fact, in this room we have the typewriter that Will had with him that he was typing with. We have a few pieces of memorabilia that he had. We have his old red suitcase that he carried. He called it the little red bag that packs itself. But the typewriter is kind of significant here in that Will wrote a weekly newspaper article for 15 years. He wrote a daily newspaper article for 9 years, and he wrote it with the old two-fingered tap, 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 tap. He said someone described his typing as sounding like an old brewery draft horse running across a wooden bridge with a loose shoe. Tap, 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 tap. He'd make a mistake. Instead of retyping, he'd take his pencil and mark through it. He took a lot of shortcuts with his typing, but this typewriter is all uppercase. It was given to him by the syndicate he wrote for out of New York City, the McNaught Syndicate, and they said it doesn't make any difference if it's capitals or lowercase. Will, you don't change anyhow, and you sure don't need punctuation marks on your typewriter. So anyhow, this typewriter is in here, and it's kind of unusual in that the last word typed on that typewriter was the word death. He was telling about dogs up in Alaska, how they'll protect their owner to their death, and that was actually the last word that was typed on it. Will Rogers was killed August the 15th, 1935 in Alaska Territory. At the time he was living in California. His body was flown back to California for burial, and he was buried in Glendale, California in Forest Lawn Cemetery, and his body lay there until 1944. After the memorial opened in 1938, well, 6 years later, the underground tomb was completed. Will's body was brought back from California along with an infant son that had died out there, Freddie, and they were both placed down here. The daughter, after she died, the mother, there's altogether 6 members of the family that are interred underground here. at the memorial. This sarcophagus is a symbol. It's kind of like a chimney sitting over the top of the underground mausoleum. The only family member, close family member that's not here is Will Jr., and he's buried out in Tubac, Arizona. He didn't live here. None of the kids lived in Oklahoma, but he asked to be buried out there, so he is not here. The rest of them are. We call this the Sunken Gardens. To the back here we have Will Rogers on old soap suds riding into the sunset. That statue was commissioned by Amon Carter out of Fort Worth, Texas, who loved Will Rogers enough that he had this statue and two others made just like it. One of them is at Texas Tech University, where Amon Carter had graduated, and the other one's in front of the Will Rogers Coliseum in Fort Worth, Texas, and then we've got the third version here of Will Rogers riding into the sunset. He said when he was living in California, his favorite thing to do was just get on old soap suds and just ride up into the mountains. So that's what he's doing. And of course this land here is the 20 acres that Will purchased in 1911. The hilltop, when Will bought this hilltop here, there was nothing here except a couple that had a little garden that lived on this hilltop. It was a mile from town, gravel road leading up from town, and immediately across the road was the Eastern University Preparatory School for Indians that started with statehood. And now it is the Rogers State University, of course named after the Rogers family. For a while it was the Oklahoma Military Academy. This entire county is named for Will Rogers' father, Clem Rogers. This is Rogers County, not named after Will, but named after Clem Rogers.
Well, Andy, this has been one of the best experiences I've had. I've traveled and seen a lot of museums around the country, but none is better presented than the Will Rogers Memorial Museum here, and you're part of the reason for that.
Well, you're very kind, Norm. We think Will's very deserving. He's the kind that he was a movie star that we're proud of.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's a rarity these days.
Never thrown in jail.
Never thrown in jail, except in a movie.
And people really wanted to be like Will, and around here Will is still quoted quite a bit. Maybe more than William Shakespeare, I'd say.
But he really, from the things that I've read and seen, though, he really was apolitical, though, because he would take both sides, wouldn't he?
He loved to pick on anybody. He had 7 presidents that he got to be friends with. I tease about it. I say Will was an advisor to 7 presidents. They didn't want his advice, but he gave it to them anyhow.
And held a lot of power.
Oh yeah. H.L. Mencken wrote about him and said he's the most powerful man in the United States, the way he can change people's attitudes.
Right.
And Will said, now Mencken, you know better than that. You'd have to be an idiot to believe what I wrote. And Mencken said, that's 85% of the Americans right there.
The early day Rush Limbaugh. Only he was a good guy. Not that Rush is bad. But anyway, well, thank you so much again. And I've been inspired by this. This has been a real important part. You know, as we begin to look at American history and think about the things that have happened, we can go to battlegrounds and see museums, and we can talk about people all day long and presidential museums. But those common people who made up the true spirit and personality of the United States of America, even in its early days, over a century ago, their influence is still forever a part of the American heritage. We hope that you've enjoyed today's visit here in Claremore, Oklahoma. I know I sure have, even though it's hotter than the dickens out here.
Come see us. We're open 365 days a year, and that's almost every day.
Almost every day. And it's free also, isn't it?
By donation only. We don't mind a donation. We'll take it.
Yeah, we'll take a donation. We hope you'll visit here in this part of Oklahoma. I know that you'll enjoy it as we have. In the meantime, keep out of trouble. Keep the bed bugs out of the bed. And
Will said, live your life so that you wouldn't be afraid to sell the family parrot to the town gossip.
On that, we'll go. Thanks for joining us on the Out of the Norm Show, where the stories are all about you. We'll see you again soon. We'll go out this way.
Like loving the South and me just loving you.